we are talking today about eco-paganism and the cult of environmental activism. I thought that was an excellent talk by Dr. Groza, and I thought he gave a beautiful 30,000-foot view of paganism, and it's very interesting, for me at least, when I first started reading into this, how much the pagan movement infiltrated the environmental movement, and how there's just so many almost sort of organic connections over there. And so that is kind of what we're going to dive into. We're going to be, so just for those of you who are attending this, our conference for the first time, our plenary sessions are designed to be very broad, overarching kind of treatments, and our breakout sessions, we get into the weeds of things. And so I am going to get into the weeds here. And I will try to give us a little bit of Q&A time at the end, but I can't promise it. So we'll see. It's going to be a fire hose session, so definitely take notes. And we'll go ahead and begin. All right. So in recent decades, environmentalism has transcended its roots as a scientific and political movement, evolving into a sort of quasi-religious phenomenon for some adherents. Dr. Groza addressed this. And this shift has been given rise to what can be termed as eco-paganism, a worldview that blends reverence for nature with spiritual practices reminiscent of ancient pagan traditions. So simultaneously, a subset of environmental activism has also taken on cult-like characteristics marked by dogmatic beliefs, ritualistic behaviors, and an uncompromising moral fervor. So in today's essay, I want to explore the emergence of eco-paganism, its parallels with historical paganism, and the cultish tendencies within environmental activism, and what these implications have for us today. Okay, so eco-paganism is not a formally organized religion, but rather sort of a diffuse spiritual orientation that elevates the natural world to a sacred status. Dr. Groza talked about this. There's a sort of sacredness that is brought into this, right? And so its proponents often draw inspiration from pre-Christian pagan traditions, which viewed the earth and the rivers and the forest and the mountains and animals as imbued with some sort of divine essence. Modern eco-pagans may not explicitly worship deities like Gaia or Pan, but they express a pantheistic or animistic reverence for nature, seeing it as a living, interconnected entity deserving of devotion. So let's go straight to the arts. And I turned to my colleague Carlos at that first session, and I told him it's interesting to me how it's always the arts that pick up on these things very quickly. So here are actually some movies that actually describe what I just talked about. How many of you have heard of Fern Gully? This is Fern Gully, The Last Rainforest. This is a cartoon back from the 1990s. Always the cartoons. Mm-hmm. An animated film with eco-pagan undertones. It portrays a magical rainforest inhabited by fairies and spirits fighting against human destruction of nature. And of course, then in the mid-2000s, we had Pan's Labyrinth. Guillermo del Toro's dark fantasy. It blends a spiritism with folklore featuring mystical creatures tied to the earth and otherworldly narrative rooted in nature's mysteries. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, Avatar, 2009. How many of you have seen Avatar? We've all seen it. James Cameron's sci-fi epic features the Na'vi, right, a species with profound animistic bond to their planet, Pandora, and their reverence for nature and a living, interconnected ecosystem reflects eco-pagan themes. Now, I will tell you this, we're not going to get into that today, but if you actually go and find a documentary or read up on sort of how James Cameron prepared for this movie, he did a lot of reading on eco-paganism, on Hinduism, Eastern mysticism, and feminism. And so, and then he put all that in a blender and we got Avatar. How about that? So anyways, this movement has roots in the countercultural upheavals of the 1960s and 70s, when there was a sort of disillusionment with industrialization and organized religion, and it kind of fueled, in a weird way, a sort of back to nature ethos. So, figures like Starhawk, a prominent eco-pagan writer and activist, bridged environmentalism with Wiccan spirituality, and he advocated rituals to honor the earth. And so today, eco-paganism manifests in practices such as, literally, tree-hugging ceremonies, solstice gatherings at sacred sites like Stonehenge, and protests framed as acts of spiritual resistance against ecological desecration. So the appeal of eco-paganism lies in its response to sort of perceived spiritual void in secular modernity. As well, actually, like Dr. Groza said, they're not really as secular as they claim to be, right? So as traditional religious frameworks wane in influence, particularly in Western societies, many individuals seek meaning in the tangible. So what does this mean? The soil, the air, the water, right? Climate change, deforestation, species extinction amplify this impulse, and casting nature as both a victim and a deity, if you will, in need of salvation. So eco-paganism thus offers a very visceral, embodied sort of spirituality that contrasts with the abstraction of monotheistic faiths. So let's talk about some parallels with historical paganism, because it's always helpful when we're able to sort of connect the dots and see that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Ecclesiastes talks about this. So eco-paganism echoes the animism and polytheism of ancient pagan cultures. In pre-Christian Europe, communities venerated local spirits tied to specific landscapes, river gods, forest nymphs, mountain deities. Similarly, eco-pagans often personalize natural elements, speaking of Mother Earth or the spirit of the forest. This anthropomorphism fosters an emotional bond with the environment, blurring the line between ecological concern and religious devotion. So like their historical counterparts, eco-pagans engage in rituals to appease or commune with nature. Ancient pagans offered sacrifices to ensure fertile harvests. Modern eco-pagans might plant trees or perform healing dances to mitigate climate change. Both share a cyclical view of time, emphasizing seasonal rhythms over linear progress. I'm originally from India, as is probably obvious. So in India, we have this festival called Pongal. And basically what they do is they will actually go around venerating objects. So if you're an auto driver, auto is this kind of like three-wheeler sort of public transportation, they'll do rituals to that machine, to that vehicle, and they'll put all sorts of turmeric on it, and they'll put incense sticks and all that. And basically they're giving these inanimate objects thanks for giving them a livelihood. Okay, so this sort of view, you have to keep in mind, I share that with you because this sort of view is deeply embedded in many cultures. This idea that there is a sort of divine essence to inanimate objects as well. And I've seen people do that to these big trees that they have in front of their home, because the tree has given their family shade, it's given them fruits, it's all these kind of things, and they literally, anthropomorphize these things. So, eco-paganism diverges from its predecessors in its global scope. Ancient paganism was intensely local, tied to specific tribes and territories, but today's eco-paganism, influenced by globalization and scientific awareness, addresses planetary crises like global warming, uniting disparate groups under a shared ecological sort of cosmology. All right, this all sounds very abstract. Let me tie this to some actual examples. Okay, here are some political initiatives of eco-paganism. Again, this is not something new. This has been going around for a while. So let's go back to India. In India, in the 1970s onwards, we had something called the Chipko movement. Okay, this was a grassroots initiative that saw villagers, particularly women, physically embracing trees to prevent deforestation. It was rooted in a sort of spiritual reverence for nature, very akin to eco-paganism. It wasn't overtly pagan, but it drew on indigenous and Hindu beliefs about the sacredness of trees and land. So what was the political impact of this? If we're going to talk about a particular instance or incident that happened, I also want to talk to you about that these are not some, sometimes we tend to dismiss people who have like fringe ideas or fringe practices and be like, they're just nutcases out on the side, then what's going to happen? No, these actually have real world consequences. And here was the political impact of that. The movement influenced Indian forest policy, leading to bans on commercial logging in certain regions like Uttarakhand. It's a model of eco-spiritual activism with the political edge. Hi, come on in. So, while this organization was not a formal group, it was supported by figures like Chandi Prasad Bhatt and Dasholi Gram Swarajya Sangh, a cooperative with eco-spiritual leanings. So these women who went around hugging trees and protesting actually got the government to change policy that went in their favor, okay? Another one, Pagan Community Statement on the Environment. This was drafted by a coalition of pagans. This statement framed climate change as a moral and spiritual crisis, urging collective action to protect the earth. It's less a policy push and more a call to influence political discourse through a pagan lens. And this was initiated by figures like John Halstead and supported by diverse pagan groups. Who are these pagan groups? Witches, druids, and the covenant of the goddess, right? What was its political impact? It aimed to unite pagans globally and encourage participation in broader environmental political advocacy, even though it was not tied to a very specific law. And it was signed by over 8,000 people across 80 plus countries. These movements are having impacts. Here's another one, Green Party advocacy. Okay, these had spiritual undertones as well. Some Green Party factions, especially in Europe, have historically included members influenced by eco-paganism, advocating for policies like rewilding and biosphere egalitarianism, which basically is equal rights for all living things. And this echoes deep ecology and animist principles. What was their political impact? Green parties have shaped legislation such as Germany's renewable energy laws, Energiewende is what they call it, though the pagan element is subtle and not dominant. So the Green Party, various national branches, example Germany's Die Grünen and affiliated groups like the European Federation of Green Parties, were some of the political organizations that were actually pushing these. All right, so those are just a few examples of some actual political organization, okay? So what were these organizations kind of promoting in their activism? So their focus was, and you guys can look this up as well, a pagan collective founded by Starhawk, okay, blending witchcraft with environmental and social justice activism. And they use rituals to empower political actions like protests against fossil fuels or nuclear power. And their initiatives included reclaiming members had joined anti-pipeline protests and advocate for policies protecting sacred land, often framing their work as a spiritual duty to the earth. Here's another one, the Covenant of the Goddess, COG. Their focus, this was a Wiccan organization that supports environmental causes as part of its nature-centric theology. And they endorsed initiatives like the Pagan Community Statement. I don't have this statement right now in front of me, but you guys can look it up. COG encouraged members to lobby for climate policies and participate in local conservation efforts reflecting eco-pagan values in political spheres. Here's another group. It's called Earth First. It was a radical environmental group with some members embracing animist or pagan-like views of nature's sanctity. Their motto is literally called "No Compromise in Defense of Mother Nature." And it resonates with eco-paganism. So Earth First has pushed for wilderness preservation through direct action, example, tree sitting. I'm not even sure exactly what tree sitting is. I need to look that up.
It's blocking deforestation.
Oh, yeah, right. They just kind of form a hedge or something around it.
Civil disobedience.
Yeah, civil disobedience. Got it. Okay. And it influenced policies like the U.S. Wilderness Act expansions, though their pagan ties are informal. Again, are you starting to see a pattern here? there is a lot of political activism going on here, but it is not overtly pagan in the old kind of sense of pagan.
And they're moving it to the mainstream.
It is becoming very mainstream. It is becoming very political. And one of the fallacies we have here in the West is if we see something as political, we immediately disconnect it from any possible spiritual, supernatural, religious, theological connections. We immediately think, oh, this is something sociocultural, this is something political. But these things have, the engine driving it is a sort of theological, religious sort of fervor. Here's another one, the Green Fuse. It's an online platform exploring eco-paganism, embodiment, and activism. It's more educational, but it supports political engagement rooted in pagan spirituality. And it promotes ideas like biospheric egalitarianism and has inspired activists to lobby for nature's legal rights, akin to efforts in New Zealand granting personhood to rivers. In one sense, this is not surprising at all. If you're going to say that there is a sort of divine essence within a tree or a river, it's not that far of a stretch to then move on to giving that thing rights. This is actually a very, logical conclusion to which they arrive at. So, in summary, these initiatives and organizations don't always label themselves eco-pagan, but their actions, ritualistic protests, nature reverence, or policies treating the earth as sacred align with its ethos. Political wins are often indirect. They're influencing broader environmental laws rather than creating explicitly pagan legislation. Why? I think that's common sense. If you come out as too explicitly pagan, people are going to have their guard up. People are going to start to feel suspicious. People are going to be like, that's kind of weird. Why are you doing that? And so there's always a sort of front to this, a veneer. So the overlap between eco-paganism and mainstream environmentalism shows how spiritual beliefs can fuel political change, albeit subtly. So let's talk about this sort of why I think environmental activism has cult-like qualities or characteristics. I remember actually discussing this with someone, and this person got very offended because I used the word cult. And I wasn't using it in the sense that, it's like what do you call that guy? Waco, Texas.
David Koresh.
Yeah, David Koresh. Not in that kind of cult-like sense, but there's a sort of ancillary attributes to it that I'll show you here in a bit. Okay. Parallel to eco-pagan's spiritual ascent is the emergence of a cult-like strain within environmental activism. Cults, in sociological terms, are characterized by intense devotion to a cause, right? Charismatic leadership, exclusionary beliefs, and a sense of apocalyptic urgency, if you will. And elements of these traits appear in groups like, some of what we just mentioned. And there are other groups like Extinction Rebellion, XR. You can look them up. And there's another one called Just Stop Oil. Okay? So this environmental activism often revolves around a central dogma. The belief that humanity is on the brink of ecological collapse. It's redeemable only through immediate, drastic action. Now, those of you who study history, those of you who study, let's say, tyrannical movements, tyrannical leaders, things like that, you know that a very common pattern that emerges in this sort of ideology is you have to create some sort of crisis. You have to create some sort of fear if you want people to move. Otherwise, people are just too, how do you shake them out of their slumber? Well, you have to create a crisis. You have to create a sort of fear. Age-old tactic, it's always worked, still works today. And so they have to make the case that the Earth is on the brink of ecological collapse, right? Who was it? I think it was AOC a few years ago said 12 years, correct? You remember this?
12 years.
What's that?
It's been 12 years.
It's been 12 years for a long time, right? Okay, 12 years. There we go. And so this narrative mirrors, the sort of millenarianism of religious cults, which prophesy imminent doom unless the followers adhere to strict codes, okay? So XR, which is the Extinction Rebellion group, declared a climate emergency and deadlines for carbon neutrality. For example, they wanted a net zero by 2025. Oh, here we are, 2025.
They have an agenda, but they're trying to sell it kind of in a common sense environment way, but it's really an agenda for the eco-paganism of power.
You know, and I'll tell you this, I'm just going to step away from my notes here for a little bit. I'm such a sucker for disaster movies. I love disaster movies, right? How many of you watch movies like, what is that, 2012, The Day After Tomorrow, there's Armageddon, San Andreas. These are all movies that are like, oh, Mother Nature has turned against us. Everything's falling apart. There's 5 tornadoes around us taking down downtown New York. You know, like everything is turned to 11. And so there is an ideology at work in Hollywood. This is a very, very powerful motivator that the earth is on the brink of collapse. If we humans would just get our act right, get it together, maybe Mother Earth will relent and let us survive. Okay? So, second, these movements cultivate rituals that reinforce group identity and purpose. What do I mean by that? XR's Red Rebel Brigade, they're clad in blood red robes, perform silent theatrical marches. You should look it up, it's pretty funny actually, evoking both mourning and sacred procession. Just Stop Oil's activists glue themselves to roads or artworks. How many of us have seen this in the news over the last few years? They just glue themselves to walls or to the asphalt on the ground. And then you have to have the construction guys come and drill their hands out of it. These are all activists. These are all their adherents. And these are acts of self-sacrifice that parallel martyrdom in religious traditions. Such performances transcend mere protest, becoming symbolic enactments of devotion to the earth. Guys, I'll tell you this. We look at these we look at some 20-year-old kid gluing his hand to the asphalt on the road, and we roll our eyes and say, hey, he just needs to grow up. But it is remarkable to me how the optics of something like that can become so powerful for a movement. It's not about the rationality. It's not about the common sense. It's look at the devotion. If you're gluing your hands to the asphalt, you are a saint. You're a martyr for the cause. And we should not underestimate the optical power of those kinds of practices. Third, a cultish exclusivity pervades some activist circles, right? Those who question the efficacy of radical tactics or prioritize human needs. So for example, jobs in fossil fuel industries, right? They're often branded as heretics or climate deniers, even if they acknowledge environmental challenges. So there's a sort of binary morality, if you will. Thank you, Karl Marx. Good versus evil, green versus greedy, right? Stifles nuance and alienates potential allies, reinforcing a sort of us versus them mentality. Go back and look at any cult from the last 20, 30 years. All of them at the core, at one of the core doctrines of their movement is a us versus them.
This is an eschatology of the liberal movement. It's a theology. You have to be religious to glue yourself to the ground. You can be very committed. But this is definitely an eschatological end of life apocalyptic.
Yes. And that is one of the ways they create a sense of urgency. They create a sense of, again, you have to manufacture the crisis. You have to manufacture the fear. You have to say, they are coming for us. The earth is turning against us. We have to do this, right? It's cultish. Finally, charismatic figures amplify the cult dynamics, right? Leaders like, wait for it, Greta Thunberg, while not formally aligned with any one group, embody a prophetic archetype, a young, uncompromising, and morally authoritative figure. In pigtails. Her stark pronouncements, I want you to panic, or the more famous, how dare you, right? Resonate as calls to repentance, galvanizing followers into a fervent, almost a sort of messianic crusade, if you will. It is amazing to me how a young teenage Swedish girl in pigtails has become the poster child for powerful movements like this. The adults in the room are bending over. The adults in the room are prostrating themselves and be like, you're right, you're so right. It's not about the rationality. It's not about, hey, Greta, get back to school. Go do your homework. It's not, no. She is a symbol. She's an activist. She's a martyr. She's a saint. Is this not cultish? Yes, it is. All right. So what are the implications and some critiques? Okay, the fusion of eco-paganism and cult-like activism has profound societal implications. On one hand, it's galvanized unprecedented attention to environmental issues, pushing policies like renewable energy adoption and conservation efforts. The emotional and spiritual framing of nature's plight cuts through the apathy that scientific data alone often fails to pierce. Yet this fusion also risks excesses, right? The deification of nature can lead to anti-human tendencies where human needs like housing, food, and security and economic stability are subordinated to an abstract ideal of ecological purity. Radical activism's disruptive tactics, such as blocking roads or defacing art or alienating the public and undermining broader support, all these things actually, I think, do a lot of harm to the cause, even in some sense, at least for those of us who are in the more saner stream of things. People who are trying to get to work on time or people who are rushing to the airport to catch their flight could care less about this kid who just glued his hand to the asphalt blocking all traffic. Okay, so there is a definite stream where this actually hurts their cause in some sense. So critics argue that eco-paganism and its activist offshoots reflect a privileged worldview, disproportionately embraced by affluent Westerners who can afford to romanticize nature. How many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, right? You guys have heard about that. You've seen that triangle kind of thing, right? And I think that's right. I think that makes sense. There are many parts of the world, many parts that my wife and I have been to, India, China, so many other parts of the world where people just want food to eat. They just want to be taken care of. They just want the basics. They don't have the bandwidth in their lives to worry about, nature turning against them. And so in one sense, this movement is out of touch, if you will. So eco-paganism and the cult of environmental activism represents a fascinating evolution of humanity's relationship with the natural world. They channel ancient spiritual impulses into a modern crisis, offering meaning and agency in the midst of a sort of ecological uncertainty. And yet their excesses, like dogmatism, exclusivity, and a tendency toward escapism, they deserve some scrutiny for that. As a society, as society navigates climate change and biodiversity loss and things like that, the challenge lies in harnessing these movements' passion while grounding them in reason, inclusivity, and a holistic view of human and environmental well-being. So, what does this mean for us? Let's look at this from a Christian analysis. From a Christian perspective, eco-paganism and its activist expressions can be critiqued and engaged through the lens of stewardship, a biblical principle rooted in Genesis 1, where humanity is tasked with dominion over creation. Unlike eco-paganism's pantheistic deification of nature, Christian stewardship views the earth as God's creation entrusted to humans for care, not worship. This distinction should guard against elevating nature above its creator or humanity and emphasizing a balanced responsibility to tend the earth while meeting human needs. I think we're actually seeing a very similar thing happening in AI as well, and the development of technology. We are taking the creation and saying, wow, we can build this thing up to such a level that it not only can be better than us, but should be better than us. It's a slippery slope. So the cultish fervor of some activism contrasts with the Christian call to humility and love. Okay? While the urgency of environmental crisis aligns with prophetic calls to justice, the exclusionary tactics and self-righteous tone of radical groups diverge from Jesus' example of grace and reconciliation. Stewardship encourages practical action, conservation, sustainable living without idolizing nature or demonizing dissenters. Positively, eco-paganism's passion for creation echoes the Christian mandate to cherish God's handiwork. I don't think, again, like I said, I don't want to poo-poo on everything that these guys are doing. I'm glad that they care about nature. We should too. We should care about the earth. We should care about these things, but not deify it. And so Christianity offers hope, right? But eco-paganism wants to pitch escapism or despair. They want to pitch the apocalypse. They want to pitch that everything's falling apart, right? And so it's important to remember that there's a promise of renewal, not through human effort alone, but through God's redemptive plan. This Christianity clearly talks about this. And so thus Christians can affirm environmental care as stewardship while redirecting eco-pagan zeal toward worship of the Creator, fostering solutions that honor both humanity and the earth. And the Bible provides a clear narrative. God created the world good. Sin corrupted it, and Christ's redemption extends to all creation. So this perspective avoids the extremes of eco-paganism and activism while offering a hopeful, God-centered approach. Scripture affirms the goodness of creation as a reflection of God's glory, not as a deity itself. Psalm 19:1 declares, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." Nature is a gift to be cherished, not worshipped. Eco-paganism's error is in conflating the created order with the Creator, a mistake that Christians must reject outright. The Bible acknowledges the fallenness of the world, right? Romans 8:21 describes creation as subjected to futility, I believe is the word it uses, groaning under the weight of sin. And environmental crisis, whether deforestation, pollution, or climate shifts, are not merely human failures, but symptoms of a broader cosmic brokenness. Radical activism often overlooks this, right? Placing undue blame on humanity. This is not to say that humans have not, humans have done bad things toward our environment. Of course, we have, but we are not the primary problem. And I think that's what this movement misses, because they don't have a theological worldview as a foundation. So Christians recognize that no amount of policy or protest can ultimately heal the earth. Only Christ's return will fully restore it. Third, the gospel reorients our relationship with creation. In Genesis 2:15, God places Adam in the garden to work it and keep it, establishing humanity's role as stewards. This dominion is not domination, but cultivation, a call to care for the earth in a way that honors God and serves others. Colossians 3:23 reminds believers to work as for the Lord, including in how we manage resources and treat the environment. So, how then should Christians respond to environmental concerns without falling into the pitfalls of eco-paganism or activism? So the following principles can provide a way forward. Number one, here's something you would never expect to hear. Worship God alone. Mm-hmm. Christians must guard against any ideology that elevates creation to divine status. Our reverence is reserved for God alone, who sustains the earth, Hebrews 1:3. Environmental care should flow from gratitude to the Creator, not devotion to the created. I'll say that again. Environmental care should flow from gratitude to the Creator, not devotion to the created. Okay? Worship God alone. Number 2, exercise faithful stewardship. The call to dominion is a call to responsibility. Christians should seek practical ways to care for the environment, reducing waste, supporting conservation, or advocating for just policies without idolizing nature or demonizing humans. The stewardship reflects God's character and anticipates the new creation. Number 3, prioritize human dignity. Isn't this interesting that human dignity gets lost in the middle of all of this? We have elevated and just raised up nature and everything and put it on such a pedestal to the point where it's completely overshadowed the one group that is actually made in the image of God, right? While environmentalism often pits nature against people, Scripture affirms the priority of human life made in God's image. Efforts to address ecological issues must not neglect the poor, the unborn, or the marginalized, who often bear the brunt of both environmental harm and extreme policies. Prioritize human dignity. Number 4, embrace hope, not fear. Unlike the despair of activism or the guilt of eco-paganism, Christians approach or must approach creation with hope. Revelation 11:18 promises that God will destroy the destroyers of the earth. And Romans 8:21 assures us that creation will be set free from its bondage to corruption. Our efforts matter, but they rest in God's ultimate plan, not humanity's perfectionism. And number 5, proclaim the gospel. Environmentalism cannot save souls or the planet. Only Christ can. Christians must resist the temptation to replace evangelism with ecological advocacy. The greatest gift we offer the world is the message of reconciliation to God. What good is it if we manage to recreate Eden and all the humans are going to, be lost? What good is that? The greatest gift we offer the world is the message of reconciliation to God, which alone addresses the root of all brokenness. So, in conclusion, eco-paganism and radical environmental activism, while rooted in a legitimate concern for the earth, strays into dangerous territory by promoting idolatry, despair, and legalism. Christians must discern these pitfalls, rejecting any worldview that displaces God or distorts humanity's role in his creation. Instead, we are called to a balanced biblical approach, worshiping the Creator, stewarding his world faithfully, and resting in the hope of redemption. As the church navigates these issues, our witness should shine as a light, not conforming to the spirit of the age, but pointing to the one who holds all things together. Colossians 1:17. In a culture increasingly captivated by eco-spirituality and activism, this Christ-centered perspective offers both clarity and peace, grounding our care for the earth in the eternal purposes of God.